In the past week, Alaska became the focus of global attention. Two names made the entire world follow closely: Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. A meeting of less than 5 hours, yet powerful enough to unsettle Europe and shake the international political chessboard. What lies behind the smiles and handshakes on the red carpet, and who is truly the one gaining from the message of comprehensive peace? In this video, I will analyze the Anchorage summit, showing that Trump was disadvantaged against Putin in 4 points. 1. Putin gained victory in terms of image. 2. Trump put himself in a passive position. 3. Putin did not concede, yet still gained more than he lost. 4. Trump changed tone and shifted responsibility onto Ukraine. Is it really so? Let's together break down in detail the 4 reasons why Trump lost to Putin right on his home ground. On August 15, 2025, in Alaska, a political and diplomatic event closely followed by the international community took place: the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. This event lasted for hours at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base, a strategic U.S. site in Anchorage. From the very organizing stage, the scale of ceremony already showed its exceptional nature: a long red carpet, an honor guard in perfect order, and in the sky, American fighter squadrons performing a welcoming flight display. All of these rituals not only emphasized solemnity, but also sent a strong message in terms of imagery. What made the event even more notable was Putin's public presence on U.S. soil, while the arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, the ICC, was still in effect. This was the first time in many years that a Russian leader appeared openly in a Western country and under a high-level ceremonial reception. The event highlighted a contrast with recent years when Russia was constantly pushed into isolation. Looking back in 2022 at the G20 summit in Bali, Russia was entirely absent, and Putin's chair remained empty. A year later at the NATO summit in Vilnius, Russia continued to be labeled as a direct threat, and no one wanted to shake his hand. That is why the image of Putin walking on the red carpet in Anchorage created a symbolic reversal from a leader once isolated on the global stage to appearing in the position of being welcomed at a key American military base. It is notable that Washington did not issue any statement recognizing Putin's legitimacy. However, his presence in Alaska within an event hosted by Trump, a man who still has the chance to return to the White House, was enough to send a clear signal: Russia is no longer under absolute isolation. This was a significant diplomatic shift, especially for Russian citizens who cared deeply about their country's global standing, as well as for parts of the world questioning America's influence. If imagery gave Putin the advantage from the beginning, then during negotiations, the strategic balance also tilted toward Moscow. Donald Trump, the initiator and arranger of the meeting, ultimately fell into a passive stance. What happened before and after the Alaska summit revealed a paradox: Trump placed himself into a politically and media-wise awkward situation. Before the meeting, Trump's side deliberately lowered expectations. He called it a listening session and insisted that no breakthrough was expected. This is a common negotiation tactic, reducing public pressure to safeguard image in case results remain vague. But only days later, he unexpectedly raised the tension by declaring that harsher sanctions would be imposed if Russia refused a ceasefire. This sudden shift only made the negotiation picture more complicated. The striking fact is that when the summit ended, Trump could not produce any concrete leverage. There was no ceasefire announcement, no joint memorandum, and no new negotiation framework. Instead, he returned to his initial stance, admitting that ceasefires are often unsustainable and stressing the need for a comprehensive peace solution. Yet this was precisely the argument Moscow had repeated many times before, showing that Trump was somewhat drawn into Putin's reasoning orbit rather than keeping initiative. Many international observers compared the Alaska summit to Trump's 2018 meeting with Kim Jong-un. At that time, Trump declared achieving a comprehensive denuclearization deal, but in reality, it was only a vague joint statement without a roadmap. This time, the script seemed to repeat Trump-raised expectations with tough words, but the results were unclear, making those very expectations a political burden. In this context, Russia continued applying its familiar approach, no clear concessions, yet keeping dialogue alive to preserve leverage. This tactic had often been used by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. For instance, Khrushchev prolonged the Berlin crisis in 1961 to weaken pressure from Washington. In Alaska, Putin seemed to apply the same principle, giving no concrete commitment, but through patience, gradually forcing his counterpart to lose initiative. In reality, even without any significant concessions from Russia, President Putin still left the summit with a favorable diplomatic outcome, even seen as gaining more than losing. Before the meeting, Moscow firmly held onto its core demands, blocking Ukraine from joining NATO, recognizing annexed territories, and ending sanctions. After the talks, there was no statement from the United States outright rejecting these conditions. Instead, in the joint remarks, both sides emphasized a comprehensive solution. This made Russia's stance appear as a legitimate viewpoint on the negotiation table rather than being dismissed from the outset. The highlight is that Putin did not have to trade away anything. The United States did not announce any new sanctions package. According to the Wall Street Journal and Reuters, the two sides even discussed possible cooperation in non-military fields such as technology and space. This created a stark contrast. Russia came into the summit under siege, but left without losing anything, and with new chances of opening cooperative channels. The fact that Russia and the United States engaged in direct dialogue while Ukraine and the European Union were absent raised concerns. Analyses from the ECFR and the Times warned that this was a setback to the principle of stakeholder negotiations. The big question is, if Moscow can secure positive results from Washington without concessions, then what incentive would remain for Russia to compromise in the future? While Putin held his ground and left Alaska without giving anything up, the opposite trend appeared with Donald Trump. Right after the spotlight of the Anchorage summit faded, the former U.S. president's stance quickly changed. From a negotiator aiming to pressure Moscow, he gradually appeared as an intermediary, seeking a way out. Before the summit, Trump projected a tough stance, calling for a ceasefire, warning of sanctions, and even hinting at cutting aid if the fighting continued. But only days after the meeting, instead of keeping pressure on Russia, he turned the focus toward Ukraine. His most notable statement was President Zelensky could end the war at any time if he wanted to. This echoed the argument Moscow had been making since 2014, that Kyiv is the side prolonging the conflict. Trump repeating this line right after a summit with no concrete outcome inadvertently legitimized Russia's narrative in international media. Immediately after, Trump further adjusted his message. At a press meeting in Texas, he declared, "I am ready to do everything to achieve peace, even if it means going to heaven for it." This was symbolic rhetoric, but it clearly reflected his role shift from a statesman issuing threats to positioning himself as a peace broker, an image likely appealing to American voters increasingly weary of the costs of overseas conflicts. However, on the diplomatic stage, this created a paradox. He hosted a summit that produced no agreement, yet spoke as if he already held the solution. Many major outlets, such as the Washington Post, shared the same view. Trump shifted positions too quickly, making his strategy appear incoherent. On one hand, he projected toughness toward Russia before the summit. On the other, immediately after the meeting, he echoed Moscow's arguments and placed the burden on Kyiv. This approach could undermine the trust of European allies. For if U.S. policy shifts too flexibly, partners will find it difficult to predict and harder to coordinate. While the Alaska summit was taking place, the fighting in eastern Ukraine continued to tilt in Russia's favor. Reports from Reuters and the ISW indicated that Moscow had captured additional strategic positions in Donetsk, while Kyiv was struggling more and more due to shortages of ammunition and reinforcements. Within this context, Trump and Putin, both emphasizing comprehensive peace, could easily be perceived as a diplomatic advantage for Russia. With Ukraine absent from the negotiation table, any signal could be exploited by Moscow to reinforce its position of strength. A notable point is that after the summit, Donald Trump repeatedly echoed the message President Zelensky could end the war if he truly wanted to. This statement revealed a clear shift. Instead of viewing Kyiv as the centerpiece of the peace process, Trump leaned toward the perspective that responsibility lay more with Ukraine than with Russia. This line of argument had long been employed by Moscow, and the fact that a former U.S. president repeated it raised concern among Western allies. In Brussels, the governments of the European Union had counted on Washington to take the lead role in safeguarding Ukraine's sovereignty. But when Trump signaled weariness with the prolonged war, it sparked fears of a domino effect. If the United States scaled back its commitment, Europe might be forced to readjust its own security policies while the Union itself remained divided. Many analyses from the Washington Post and international scholars also warned holding dialogues while Russia holds battlefield advantages could send the wrong signal. Instead of reducing tensions, negotiations at this moment might unintentionally prolong the conflict. Moscow could exploit dialogue rounds to delay rearm and create divisions between the United States and Europe. This is precisely what some scholars call a false peace, where meetings create only a temporary lull, only for the conflict to erupt with greater intensity later. For this reason, right after the Alaska summit, European Union leaders quickly moved to rebalance the diplomatic field. A trilateral meeting between Trump-Zelensky and European Union representatives was scheduled in Washington. This was not only an effort to secure Europe a seat at the negotiation table, but also a political message the EU would not accept the role of spectator in a security matter directly tied to its own fate. From the red carpet in Anchorage to the contradictory statements after the summit, the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin was not just a diplomatic event, but resembled a test of influence in a shifting world order. Trump did not secure a concrete agreement, but he created a political stage. Putin made no concessions, yet still left as the one steering the dialogue. And Europe and Ukraine, though absent, were the sides most visibly affected by these exchanges. Looking from Alaska, what stands out is not what was said, but who was absent, what was not signed, and the silences spreading across the geopolitical map. Is this a signal of shifting global roles, or simply a tactical step by two leaders seeking to reclaim personal political influence? And you, what do you think about the outcome of the Alaska summit? Leave a comment to share your views. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the latest international analyses.